There are a number of simultaneous events. Some Bitcoin was sold by the German government. After dragging on for a full decade, the Mt. Gox bankruptcy is finally going to be finalized, and with it, the release of around 140,000 Bitcoins. So all of these things are happening simultaneously, and the ETF has been under selling pressure. Over the long run, we remain committed to Bitcoin's core values. After looking at the data, it seems like about 80% of those flows are retail and not from true institutions just yet. It takes a long time for REITs and other large institutions to go through their investing process, underwrite risks, approve, and then allocate according to the people I've spoken to. So I'm hoping that institutional flows into those ETFs will pick up speed in the second half of this year, maybe around the end of Q3 or the beginning of Q4. I believe that will be sufficient to cause the price to rise again once we enter September and beyond. Low investor sentiment over the past several days is indicative of the market's uncertainty in cryptocurrencies. Market sentiment indicator, the Crypto Worry and Greed Index, has fallen into worry territory for the first time since October 2023, suggesting that substantial improvements may be far off in the future. Data stored on the blockchain indicates that beginning on June 19, 2024, the German Federal Criminal Police Office began transferring thousands of Bitcoin from its official wallets. The German government reportedly sent more than $220 million in Bitcoin to different exchanges and OTC desks earlier this week. We expect the transactions to continue until the wallets are empty, but in the last 24 hours it has moved at least 9,736 Bitcoin, worth around $1,564.3 million. The German government has sold 34,749 Bitcoin since mid-June, which at the current price level is worth roughly $22.01 billion. According to recent rumors, the government's Bitcoin holdings may run out before the week comes to a close. On the other hand, the MT, the Gox asset redistribution, and the overall economic climate remain unknowns. Anthony Scaramucci, founder of Skybridge Capital and a former director of communications for the White House, and Anthony Pomplino, a popular Bitcoin enthusiast and YouTuber, recently spoke with CNBC to discuss the state of the crypto market and their predictions for the future of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies beyond 2024. Additionally, they spoke on exchange-traded funds ETFs, the regulatory landscape, and the forthcoming U.S. presidential election, its effects on the cryptocurrency market. Thus, Skybridge took part in it, along with Fortress, so all of these things are happening simultaneously. And the ETF has been under selling pressure. In such a scenario, Bitcoin becomes an extremely unpredictable investment. Without getting too bogged down in Bitcoin terminology, you also had a halving. However, I believe our audience is knowledgeable about that. Alright, so each time there is a halving, the miners are compelled to sell some Bitcoin in order to maintain their earnings, which temporarily puts pressure on the price of Bitcoin. But we remain committed to Bitcoin's core values for the foreseeable future. As I mentioned before, I anticipate that it will be 170,000 after the halving. Nevertheless, I am confident that it may reach 100,000 before the end of the year, provided that it perseveres through the current difficulty. A final, brief observation, of course. FTX is expected to release approximately $16 billion in cash soon. FTX was the financial institution linked to 2 hedge funds. There was a lot of Bitcoin involved, therefore I think that's great news for Bitcoin holders. It became inoperable during the bankruptcy. Regrettably, it was dollarized at low Bitcoin values. However, those account holders will receive it again soon. Also, we anticipate that a sizable portion of that sum may end up in the assets. Life chips is what we call these. When you receive a windfall like that, you should expect it to remain in your possession. Now that you have it, you can purchase a vehicle, a home, or even a vacation home. Still, I anticipate that between 40 and 50% of that will reinvest in the asset class. These folks are nuts, you know? Even their early adopters stand out to me. You were an early adopter in the digital asset market if you had an account at FTX or Coinbase. Thus, early adopters tend to be quite devoted to the asset class in which they took part. Let me rewind the clock to the beginning of Uber. Authorities were not interested in Uber. No manager was interested in Uber. Everyone wanted Uber, the mayor included, but no authorities would approve. An item that occurred today in the GOPP platform, the party's convention, is next week is the explicit promise to safeguard digital assets and more especially Bitcoin. So in my opinion, the Democrats made a major error there. When it comes to digital assets, I think they're making a lot of mistakes. This used to be a specialized market. Mike Novogratz has stated that he believes there are 85 million wallets, so you might take his word for it. About 50 million wallets were released by Coinbase. We should prune those. Imagine for a second that only 20 million American citizens are legally able to cast a ballot. And 10% of those people only vote on one subject. There are 2 million eligible voters in a tight election that could be decided by 6 or 7 swing states whose residents may have strong opinions on a single topic involving digital assets. It's safe to say that this asset class will be well received by Americans in the long run. I have no concerns about the opposing side if that is indeed the case. The events preceding the election will unfold as follows. Are you in agreement? Tell me what you hear. Tell me the plot. It seems like President Biden is going to be the nominee. Despite his awful debate performance, I think he's certainly dug in. At this moment, former President Trump is leading in the voting in the swing states. Markets are my specialty. Well, I can tell you're an expert in the financial markets. At this time, the poly markets are leaning towards Donald Trump. This is a really tight election, though. And many things are up for grabs at the moment. Task, which is scheduled to be presented this week. On September 10th, you have another debate scheduled. I believe President Biden has an obligation to prove his intentions from the past several days if he wants to remain in the campaign. He gave a really clear interview on our sister network, Morning Joe, this morning. I think it's concerning that he's having trouble constructing complete phrases. Thus, we will observe the progression of events. In my opinion, they will need to settle on a course of action by the week's end. Vendors, rather than purchasers, naturally. Consequently, who is engaging in sales? At this time, there are primarily 2 individuals to blame. The German authorities has been attempting to sell off approximately 50,000 Bitcoin that they confiscated from a website that engaged in piracy. The intriguing part, according to the on-chain statistics, is that they are essentially trying to sell on as many exchanges as possible. They are currently in the middle of that process. It comes to around $2.5 billion. Roughly $1.5 billion have been sold. Moreover, there is the matter of the Bitcoins distributed from MT box. Thus, I believe that people are even more frightened. It back to the individuals who have been holding on to it for a long time but are now planning to sell it. Bitcoin's continued illiquidity is the most intriguing aspect about this. Because of this, the majority of Bitcoin holders are those with a long-term perspective. As a result, the price will drop as soon as the seller appears with only a couple $1 billion. Bitcoin is next on the agenda. What if I told you that someone was going to sell billions of dollars worth of stock and that the price would only drop to $55,000 or so? Wouldn't that be an optimistic prediction? This is making people see that Bitcoin is still in good shape, in my opinion. There was more than 70% of Bitcoin that had not changed hands in more than a year at the beginning of this year. Extremely high. Now, as expected in a bull market, some of that has begun to be dispersed as the price has climbed. At this point, the main concern is how resilient those hands are, and whether they can withstand the German government's efforts to contain them. How long will it be before these MT Cox distributions expire? In my opinion, that percentage will drop back down to 50 or 55% as the bull market continues. Even still, it's safe to assume that individuals with a time horizon of 10 years or more own half of the Bitcoin. After looking at the data, it seems like retail, not true institutions, are driving about 80% of those flows. It takes a long time for REITs and other large institutions to go through their investing process, underwrite risks, approve, and then allocate according to the people I've spoken to, and hence I anticipate that institutional flows into those ETFs end. The basis trade will commence in earnest in the latter part of this year, perhaps around the end of Q3 or the start of Q4. People are saying, hey, I should go put that trade on less frequently now that the spread between buying Bitcoin and selling futures has narrowed. The market is always changing, and there are a number of factors to consider when trying to keep up. Bitcoin still has a bright future, in my opinion. The current state of Bitcoin regulation,